The Houston Rockets are the latest team to prove that depth means everything in today's NBA. Now, don't get me wrong, depth has always been extremely important for championship teams, but in this modern NBA, it's very interesting to see teams like the Magic, the Thunder, and the Rockets. They have better records than teams like the Bucks, the Lakers, the Suns, and even the Mavericks, right? Now, granted, there are a lot of variables that comes with that, right? Some guys get injured, some guys miss games, and, some teams are just older. But I can't say I expected all those teams with legit superstar players to start with worse records than some of the youngest teams in the league. However, when you look at the way, for example, a team like the Orlando Magic have been without their star Paolo Banchero and have benefited from stout defense and the emergence of Franz Wagner before last night's loss to the Knicks, they went 12-1 in a 13-game span. And then you look at how impressive and how hungry the Thunder surrounding pieces look next to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And of course, the variety of youth and depth in this Houston Rockets team that they have. You will see just how things like that can happen in today's NBA. Solely relying on star power just doesn't cut it anymore. Now, sure, you definitely need a Luka Doncic, a Stephen Curry, or a Kevin Durant to create and hit big shots in a game sixes of the world, in a deep playoff run, right? But it's becoming a lot more rare to see a '06 D Wade or a '07 LeBron type of playoff run. Growing up, we always heard sayings like speed kills, defense wins championships, and basketball is a game of runs, all of which still ring true today. But I'm going to add another one that perfectly defines this Houston Rockets team and has subtly become the key to winning in today's NBA. And that's depth does damage. Look around the league. The teams with the most depth tend to do the most damage, right? Now, a bad example of this, you could say, unfortunately, the Indiana Pacers. They have lots of depth, which looks great when Tyrese Halliburton looks great. But long term, they don't have a lot of pieces that bring different skills on the floor. Sure, they can play 10, maybe even 11 guys one night, but a lot of those role players are good at one thing or good at the same thing. But the best example of this, though, is the Boston Celtics, right? Surround your two all-NBA talents with a handful of guys that can defend, shoot, and play make, right? Keyword here is and. They do all of those things, because depth can be strength in numbers, right? Like a 10, 11 man rotation, or depth can also be, the multi-skill sets showcased across an 8 or 9 man rotation. The Celtics have the latter. Drew Holiday, Derek White, and Peyton Pritchard, for example, they aren't just limited to catch and shoot scenarios. Drew Holiday has been an all-star in this league before. He knows how to run a team at the point guard position. He's also played a little bit of two guard on teams. He can defend, as we know, with the very best of them. When he gets hot, he can be a very underrated offensive player. Drew Holiday, like I said, he played combo guard a little bit more so in New Orleans. I think a little bit in Philly, but more so in New Orleans. And, he can get to the post. He can get to the basket. He has a underrated offensive game. Despite hot shooting, Derek White, Peyton Pritchard, these are guys that are able to put the ball on the floor and, like I said, aren't just limited to catch and shoot opportunities. And in turn, these guys tend to relieve Jason Tatum and relieve Jaylen Brown from their scoring duties oftentimes. And, in the middle, right? They can rotate between bigs like Kristaps Porzingis, Al Horford, two former All-Stars who can both protect the rim, do their thing on defense in the low post, but they can also face up. They can post up. They can extend that range to the 3-point line. They aren't big men who are just limited to alley-oops, like we see a lot nowadays. A lot of big men are limited to alley-oops. Those guys aren't. Pairing all this, this versatility, this depth, this offensive skill set with guys being able to play multiple positions, right? And at the end of the day, if you're Boston, you always have Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown to fall back on, right? They're always going to be ready to make those superstar plays in big moments. And it makes perfect sense why Boston has been as successful as they've been. I think other good examples would be, while slightly different, I think other good examples would be the 2022 Warriors, right? You have Stephen Curry, he's the superstar guy, but You have a guy like, of course, Klay Thompson is the sharpshooter. Jordan Poole, he's the creator off the bench. You got a Swiss Army knife in Draymond Green, Swiss Army knife in Gary Payton. Andrew Wiggins. He was a former 20-point per game scorer, an all-star that season. He knows how to get a bucket for himself. They had guys, Kevon Looney, rebounder. They had guys. The 2023 Nuggets are another good example. Again, a lot of it went through Jokic, but Jamal Murray is on the bubble of kind of an all-star caliber player. Michael Porter Jr. was somebody who people were hoping would get to that point. But that's a guy who, if you're asleep, he can get you 20. He can make a handful of threes. He can rebound well. Aaron Gordon, a lot of these guys, again, Swiss Army knife, Christian Braun, a lot of these guys can make plays for others, do the dirty work, make the right cut. They do multiple things on the floor. These are two examples of teams, with one superstar, but, a handful of role players who weren't limited to one duty on the court. And so this is where a team like the Rockets comes in. It's still very early, but they have all the tools. They have plenty of playmaking from guys like Fred VanVleet and even rookie Reed Shepherd. Shot creation and guys like Jalen Green, who still has room to play better basketball this year. He's averaging around 19 a game last I checked. Really struggling to shoot the ball from the field. Field goal percentage isn't that good, so you would like to think over the course of the season that would increase. Maybe he would get better, get more in rhythm, get better shots for himself. So again, I think it's kind of scary to think about that, but they also get the buckets from Fred VanVleet, who has experience in that area. They get defense from guys like Dylan Brooks and Tari Eason, right? The scrappy guys who are going to take pride in getting steals and deflections and just getting in the face of the opposing team's better scorers. Then you got the fill-in guys, I would say, like Jabari Smith Jr., right? Who defenses certainly can't leave open. Somebody who brings a tough matchup as a 6'10", power forward, but he can play the three. Well, at least he moves like a three, right? He can score. They have a Men Thompson who has already shown to be this Swiss Army knife for them. A guy that's going to make the winning plays night in and night out. He's always in position to make the right pass, make the right cut, get a timely stop on defense. But this is also a guy that's not shy to slash in the half court and use his athleticism to his advantage. That's the thing with a Men Thompson. It just seems like he can do a little bit of everything. And like I said, he's going to be that guy down the stretch of games and important games like the playoffs. His play is going to look even better because he's going to shine in those moments when they really need to win games. And then, even the veteran, right? Steven Adams as the backup to Alperen Sengun. This is a guy who he's back from injury and he's playing that backup role. He can ease himself back. He can just focus on doing the dirty work, getting rebounds and setting those good traditional old school screens that he's been known to do over the course of his career, to free his guys up. And then even with all that, right, the aforementioned Alperen Sengun, he's emerged as the focal point, very similar to Nikola Jokic in Denver, in a lot of ways, very similar to Domantas Sabonis in Sacramento, a big man that can pass out the post, score with his back to the basket. And again, I say, isn't limited to one skill or talent as the center of this team, right? So in a nutshell, to the main idea of this video, the Rockets, they don't have a superstar, right? They don't have crazy star power, but they seemingly have everything you could find in a prototypical superstar in the form of a 9-10 man rotation. Playmaking, scoring, defense, high IQ plays, hustle plays, decisions that won't show on the stat sheet. Credit to Ime Udoka because he's found a way to use this depth to his advantage and has all these guys playing the game the right way. The Rockets, the last few years, they've raised questions because they seem to have so much young and hungry talent to the point, the chemistry looked off and it looked a little immature. But, getting some veterans on board, not only on the floor but on the sidelines, right? Again, a guy like Ime Udoka and his staff, they finally look like a team that genuinely wants to play for each other. That's what stood out to me the most when I watched the Houston Rockets. They are finally at a point where they look like they want to play for each other, which is a great leap of maturity for them. I see a lot of off-ball movement, setting, guys on the wings that are setting screens for each other. They'll give up the ball, set a screen for the guard. They don't quit on the play. I think they play a lot of eyes up basketball, so to speak, for lack of a better term. Like, they're always looking for the next play. They're always looking for how they can not just help themselves, but help a teammate, right? Where guys aren't just looking for their own shot, but the right shot for the team. All of that is great to see, and I think a big credit as to why the Houston Rockets have found so much success in this young season. But all that said, I'm not saying the Houston Rockets will be in the finals this year. I do see them somewhere in between that Pacers example of depth that I gave earlier and the Celtics example I gave. I see them in between that because I still don't know if Jalen Green and Fred VanVleet specifically are primed to hit those big shots the Rockets will need them to take and make on the big stage that is the NBA playoffs. I know guys like Dylan Brooks and Jabari Smith Jr., they aren't shy to take those shots either, which again, it points to their depth. That's a good sign, how a lot of these guys can hit big shots down the stretch of games. But if they want to win playoff series, the stars are going to have to do their jobs and come through and not rely on the role players heavily. But that said, they are making similar strides that I think we saw in other young teams like, again, the OKC Thunder, the Orlando Magic the last couple of seasons. Teams that on paper you wouldn't necessarily think are top seeds in the conference, right? But once you see how it all works on the court, you start to see how that depth that exists on that paper is what does live up to the hype.